Heidi Muyeso-Kunzman, and I'm an Extension Associate with the Community and Regional Development Institute at Cornell University. The Institute, which many of you may know of as CARDI, is an applied social science research institute that conducts research and educational programs designed to help communities, and with particular relevance to this webinar, regions, make informed decisions. I'm also an associate director with the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development based at Penn State, the mission of which is to enhance the capacity of land-grant institutions in the Northeast for rural development. Along with the Department of City and Regional Planning, we at CARDI are very pleased to bring you today's Sustainable Communities webinar on the economic implications of Marcellus Shale natural gas development, understanding potential impacts on tourism, agriculture, and housing. Joining us today to give this presentation is City and Regional Planning Professor Susan Christopherson and members of her graduate workshop on economic development. Before turning the mic over to Susan, who will tell you a little bit about the class and the work that the students have been engaged in, I want to speak briefly about this webinar series, give you a sense of who is on the webinar today or who registered to get the recording, and then quickly review the webinar format. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Sustainable Communities series, it was developed with the recognition that New York communities, like communities everywhere today, face great challenges, but at the same time, great opportunities. Given this context, the series is designed to address topics of interest to New York communities and the extension educators and other community developers working in them, as well as legislators and other local leaders. We've chosen these topics with the goal of providing information that facilitates informed decision-making at the community level, that is information that helps communities identify, pursue, and achieve their goals. In terms of those who either registered to participate or asked for a link to the recording of the webinar, folks representing the following groups are either on the webinar today or will be presumably viewing it. And I'll just remind you that we are recording, and assuming that we don't have any technical difficulties, okay, the sound is uneven. Let me know. We'll try to stay closer to the mic, but keep us posted. Does that sound a little bit clearer? Okay, so we'll make sure we're almost eating the mic, and we can try to speak up a little bit, so we'll stay tuned to this. So again, the folks who have either registered to participate joining us today or also received the link we have many, many planners working at multiple levels of government, city, town, county, and state with different foci, sustainability, transportation, management, general planning. We also have cooperative extension educators, students and professors, energy consultants, members of community-based natural gas groups, local, county, and state legislative representatives, economic developers, soil and water conservation district staff, staff from preservation associations and parks, financial lenders, lawyers, farmers, and members of the press. If I have missed anyone, please feel free to type your affiliation into the chat box. Today's presentation will last an hour and a half, and as I said, Susan will provide an introduction, and then the students will introduce themselves as they give their parts of the presentation. We will pause throughout the presentation to take questions. If you're not familiar with webinars, there is a chat box in the bottom pod on the left of your screen. You should enter your questions into that box and push the send button to the right of it. We will ask you to hold your questions until the time that we've allotted for them. However, if your question involves a point of clarification, meaning you didn't understand something that we've said, please let us know. We don't want to leave anyone out, and we'll take it at that point. Because of the number of folks on today's call, and we're expecting more, we may not get to all of them, but we'll certainly do our best. The presenters have also graciously agreed to address questions that we don't get to during the webinar by email later on. So we'll have that in the chat box and let them know. I'll also let you know that we do have a small in-person audience who will also be fielding questions here as well. The session is being recorded, and again, assuming no technical glitches arise, we'll be posting the webinar online. Because you've participated in it, you will receive a link to the recording as well. I will just say that once in a while, we have technical glitches occur. You're already letting us know that the sound might be a little bit of a challenge, so we'll try to be tuned into that. Please bear with us. We sometimes find that some folks will lose sound on their own end, If it's an individual issue, we encourage you to get out of the webinar and then come back in, but we'll work through it to the best of our ability. So with that, are there any questions at this point? Any from any of you? Okay, then I'm going to turn the mic over to Susan.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to learn about and discuss the economic consequences of hydrofracturing natural gas drilling. My name is Susan Christofferson, and I'm a professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning at Cornell University. For the past 4 months, a group of master's students at Cornell University has been conducting research on the economic consequences of hydraulic fracturing natural gas drilling. We know that hydraulic fracturing for natural gas drilling has been going on for some time and that there are shale plays in many regions of the U.S. One of the goals of this particular research project has been to examine shale gas plays that have been under development for some time, for example, in Colorado, Wyoming, and Texas, to learn about what happens on the ground when hydraulic fracturing takes place in a region. Today, the researchers will be presenting their results on how hydraulic fracturing activity may impact housing costs and values and industries that are important in many shale gas plays, agriculture and tourism. Although physical conditions, regulations, and politics differ across shale plays, we believe we can learn a lot from the experience of other shale plays. The reason for this confidence is that the technologies used in hydrofracturing and the regional infrastructure required are very similar across shale plays. It is these technologies and infrastructure that have to be considered in assessing potential economic consequences.
Okay, can you hear us again now? I'm not sure. We don't know exactly why we got bumped out, but we did. So again, thank you for your patience, and Susan's going to start again. We lost you.
I need to forward the next slide. Okay. Okay, I'm going to repeat the last couple of paragraphs I said. The research that will be presented today is part of a broader research and outreach effort at Cornell University intended to inform the public and policymakers about the consequences of hydraulic fracturing and what policy measures should be considered to address those consequences. Although there are many researchers at Cornell involved in this effort, the economic consequences have been a particular focus in a project sponsored by the Park Foundation in Ithaca and the Heinz Endowments in Pittsburgh. This work, including a link to the webinar you're going to hear today, is available at www.greenchoices.cornell.edu. In this project, we've had the benefit of working with a set of clients from Tompkins County and Schuyler County in New York. They've been critical in grounding the research in real issues and letting us know where they see gaps in information. We are very grateful for their participation and welcome them as part of the audience today. Now let's get started. I'd like to introduce Austin Zwick, who will present the framework that members of this research group use to look at the impacts of horizontal shale gas drilling. Austin?
Thank you. My name is Austin Zwick. I'll be introducing the presentation. Our project looks to discuss the long-term economic planning implications of horizontal hydrofractured natural gas drilling and how that would affect the well-being of the pre-existing local populations. In order to do our project, we divide the economic impacts into two groups: housing and tourism and agriculture. One of our major contributions is that we're one of the first studies to look across multiple shale plays. The reason we do this is by looking across a number of shale plays, even though one might not be directly comparable, we can find similarities despite the differences. Some information that we can find consistent benefits and consistent costs, and consistent winners and consistent losers in natural gas drilling. We can illuminate regional impacts from gas drilling between multiple regions and inside a singular region. We can find similar economic impacts and therefore have multiple examples and have much stronger evidence of the costs and benefits of drilling. This way we can plan and we can help planners know what to expect. One planner from Pennsylvania said that he did not expect the compressor stations. You can see one on above. That one was built in Sublette County in Wyoming. The noise that they cause, and the planners want to know where these things will go beforehand and have some input into the process. We looked at 5 different shale plays, including the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, the Bossier-Haynesville Shale on the Texas-Louisiana border, 4 different shale plays that intersect Colorado, and to a much lesser extent, the Barnett Shale play in Texas and the Fayette Shale play in Arkansas. In order to do our analysis, we divided the counties into 4 different groups. First, in the middle of the sweet spot, the red counties, you'll see are the core counties. These are counties that have at least 150 wells per year drilled, and usually many more than that, a couple hundred perhaps. Outside the red counties, you see the orange counties are called the extension counties. Those counties have between 50 and 150 wells drilled per year. Then you have the green counties, the periphery counties. These tend to have less than 50 wells drilled a year. And finally, you have the ring around all the counties. These are the adjacent counties. These have few to no wells drilled per year, but you'll see a lot of the ancillary spillover over economic impacts occur throughout the shale play. What we find is that all the impacts are regional. You'll have pipelines crisscrossing the region. You'll have trucks driving throughout. You'll have compressor stations and water cleaning plants. This is a visual above is what it would look like if it was to scale where all the different wells would be. Again, the middle of the core, orange the extension, green the periphery, and finally blue, which is the adjacent ones. When looking across multiple shale plays, we see benefits that counties in the southern tier can expect to have when drilling comes to the area. First is that a few overnight millionaires will be created by signing land and mineral right leases. But most people will only receive a few $1,000s for their leases. Early contract signers in Susquehanna County got $50 per acre per year and a 12% royalty. But after gas was established, later signers got up to $7,000 per year and a 21% royalty. In the Barnett Shale play in Texas, Chesapeake Energy starting the negotiations out at $2,500 per acre and a 22% royalty, and counteroffers only bring it up from there. So not all counties will have intensive drilling, so a lot of these counties will only get the amount per acre per year and not a lot of royalty money. Another benefit is that new jobs will be created in the natural gas industry and other industries supporting the natural gas workers. As hiring begins, wages in existing jobs will increase, especially trucking, but to a lesser extent, service sector jobs that will support the workers, such as restaurants and other services. We also see expected costs for different counties and other shale plays. One concern is price inflation. Inflation in some of these counties rose faster than wages did, making several workers worse off than they were beforehand. But we also see the increased traffic congestion and accelerated road maintenance. A lot of these shale plays and wells have over 1,000 truck trips per well site, bringing water and chemicals to the site and then removing back water afterwards. There's also higher public safety costs. As many more people move to the area, demands on firefighters, police, and other emergency services increase, along with increased services on public administrative costs. Local government will need to plan, zone, permit, assess, and assist these activities. Likewise, there'll be increased demand for health and education services as well. We also see an increase in pollution and costs associated with that, such as the cost of environmentally monitoring to decrease possible emergencies, and then services to clean up possible disasters after they do occur. All of the spending we see tends to be in a boom-bust cycle, which was an observed framework that we started that was first observed in the 1960s and the 1970s to explain oil and gas drilling. But literature has later expanded to gold mining, coal mining, call centers, casinos, and any time that there's a sudden investment and therefore population increase. Some studies show that most localities can handle up to 6 to 7% population growth without significant disruptions in services occurring. But there's a wide variation among different communities. And once you get above 15% population growth per year, then institutional breakdowns in the labor market and other services occur. Sublette County, Wyoming experienced over 25% growth per year. What fuels this boom-bust cycle is that there are strong incentives for gas companies to invest money very rapidly. There are cheap land leases at the very beginning. There's also a lack of taxes and regulations on the gas industry, and there's a lack of competition between multiple gas companies. After the initial boom happens, a period of sharp contraction of investment occurs. Once all the gas is gone, the gas company leaves the area, bringing the gas workers and the money with them. A lot of businesses find themselves over their heads on investments that they can no longer support. But being aware of this investment cycle will help local governments make better decisions in the future, dealing with supply, demand, revenues, and costs that they will see. Throughout the Marcellus shale play currently, you see the boom-bust phenomenon is a local phenomenon happening in small sweet spots throughout West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and then a much larger sweet spot in southern Pennsylvania and northeastern. Along the northeastern Pennsylvania, you see Bradfield, Tioga, and Susquehanna counties at the top, where the large sweet spot is. A lot of the gas companies are hoping that the geology of the gas means that the sweet spot spills over to the southern tier of New York, specifically Steuben, Chemung, Tioga, and Broome counties, and to a lesser extent, Tompkins and Schuyler County. Even though there's enough as in the Marcellus Shale to last for 20 years. They often are in any specific region for only a few, unless there proves to be a significant amount of natural gas. As soon as the gas is depleted, the gas companies will pack up and head to the next location. Some of the general findings of our study is that state and county lines do not matter. All of the impacts are regional. We also see a Goldilocks effect, where the most profound effects are in certain types of counties. And finally, there's a large variability of effects on agricultural and tourism industries, depending on a number of factors. Now I'd like to introduce David and Vera to give the housing part of the presentation.
Hey everyone, I'm David West,
And I'm Vera Bartolome.
and we're going to talk a little bit about research that we did on the specific housing impacts that come with drilling boom. So first, I wanted to talk about, why would we look at housing? Usually, people are looking at the environmental impacts. We're looking at some other kind of industrial impacts, but we think housing is an important aspect of change in a community. It's one of the things that's going to be severely impacted when you have new population moving into an area. And housing prices are going to change based on two different factors, and they're kind of confounding factors. First, an increase in population is going to push prices upward as the demand rises faster than supply. At the same time, the externalities, the negative effects of drilling on the environment and the landscape are likely to push prices down in affected areas for a variety of reasons we'll talk about. These two things happen at the same time and spread differently, so they result in differing effects in different communities. We see this ultimately as an equity issue. We need to look at who's going to get the benefits, who's going to be burdened with the problems, and particularly we see a need to address low-income populations and renters. We see homeowners may see values increase, and that may be a good thing for them, but for a renter, if their rent increases because the land value under that rental increases, that's not really a good thing when they see rents doubling.
So we do have one quick.
So I wanted to quickly address a question that we have of, is a population increase related to the number of natural gas workers? And we can talk more about this in a question and answer section later, but I would say it's related both to people who are coming in as gas workers and a general boom in the area as other people move in and see reason to invest if they think that another business will work well. So the research that we've done looking at housing has come through two different perspectives. First, we did an analysis of rental rates. What we need to understand here to see the effect of rental rates is where are new people coming into the county is going to locate, and how is that going to affect the existing markets and the existing residents in the area. We also looked at home values, which is a kind of different perspective. We wanted to know how will being near a well or being near a pipeline or a road or another impact of drilling, how is that going to change property value? In order to understand this, we used two different approaches. We did a lot of review of existing research in the boomtown model of other places that have experienced this phenomenon, looking at news reports of housing shortages that have changed, and also effects of being near a well on a home value. In addition to kind of summing up the existing research, we did some new research of our own. Using HUD median rent estimates, this is data that's available annually and is aggregated at the county level. We looked at counties across the different shale plays that we analyzed. We combined that with some qualitative information from interviews that we think kind of rounds out our approach. So before we go on, I thought I would ask you all to kind of consider a question and get back to us and we can share the answers really quickly. We've already showed you that we divided counties into 4 different types. And I want you to think about how you think the effects of Marcellus Shale or any shale boom would affect the area, and tell us which of these kinds of counties do you think will have the largest increase in rental values. You can go ahead and put in your answers now.
So most of you said that extension counties would be the most affected. Here we have a statistical analysis we did with data about all across shale plays. And here you can see that those counties in the periphery, meaning those who have some or few wells, but not a lot, like in the core and extension counties, they are the most affected. They reach a rent increase from 2001 to 2010 up to 60%, whereas adjacent extension and core counties, they around 43 to 47% rent. We wanted to qualify that data a little bit. As you can see here, we divided the counties into, depending on the size of their largest city. And you can see that we divided them into 5 categories and grouped them into 2 major groups, depending on the rent increase. You can see that the nucleuses who have less than 10,000 residents in them experience more rent increase than those which are larger. The main cities in them, they are larger. So this can indicate that the larger cities can neutralize the impact of this increase in population due to the gas drilling industry.
Okay, so those were the averages, the total trend that we saw over all counties. And now I'm going to talk more specifically about how we came to these numbers and some of the diversity within the averages. What you're looking at now is a 3D visualization of the counties we looked at in Colorado. And the height of the counties is based on how much their rent increased from 2001 to 2010. And then the color is the drilling intensity. So red being the most drilling, blue being the least. And what you see is there's just a lot of diversity among these counties. We have counties with a lot of drilling and almost no rent change here. And we have counties with no drilling and lots of rent change. And so you can see that the averages don't tell the whole story, and there's kind of a broad effect that's going to be different in different places. So the way we came to this analysis is we started by mapping in the bottom corner here, mapping the change in rent over all the counties. And when we compared that to where we saw the most drilling, it didn't seem like it made a lot of sense. So we were looking for a factor that explained this. And one of the things we looked at was the population distribution. And that's in the other. This turned out to be a fairly useful metric, and I'll show on the next slide. We found that counties that experienced the most population change frequently had a similar demographic profile. They were generally fairly rural with small to medium-sized urban centers. We describe this as a Goldilocks effect. It seems like counties that have a very low density, that are very rural, won't attract a lot of workers because there's just not a lot available there. Whereas more urban places may be attracting a lot of people, but they have the ability to absorb an additional population. Whereas these counties that have kind of small population but have some amenities that workers would want to locate near, shops, that kind of thing, are likely to experience a large impact from the drilling, and particularly increase in population. I should say that the numbers that we're seeing here in percent change, the red group is between 82% and 129% over 10 years. It ends up being very significant. Looking at the Haynesville shale play, we again see a somewhat similar distribution. We can see the core county in this play experience large impacts, large rent increase. We also see a lot of the outlying counties and experiencing similar impacts. So this is something that is going to be spread across the regional level. In Pennsylvania, it's a little early to see effects. The drilling has not been going on as long as in the other shale plays. We can already see a spread of change in rental price. And we're hearing this from a lot of the people that we've talked to in interviews. And Greg is going to talk a little bit more about specifically what he's heard from people.
Thank you, David. To strengthen our quantitative analysis, we've conducted interviews with various officials in Pennsylvania's northern tier. County planners have told us that Due to the increased rents has caused displacement of local tenants, local residents, since the gas workers are able to afford the higher rents. In some cases, landowners are actively kicking out current tenants to make rooms for gas workers, and this is true on mobile home parks. The uncertainty in the value of the land is due to the uncertainty in the value of the mineral rights beneath the land makes it difficult to get appraisals, thus making it difficult to sell one's property. They also have noted that there's been a decrease in subdivisions. Landowners stand to make a lot more money in royalties than in subdividing and selling lots. In some places, subdivisions have practically stopped. We've also noticed that speculators have bought up land, but property values have yet to increase. And there has been a difficulty in getting mortgages near well pads. Banks are not offering mortgages to lessees since banks would not be the first lien holder on these gas rights. As far as ways that they are trying to mitigate these effects, the county planners say that there are county and regional plans to address transportation and open space issues, but there is not sufficient regulatory authority by the county or regions to implement these plans. It's important to address the effects of drilling on the regional level, but there are few tools to do so. Local governments have done what they can do under the legal framework to regulate the location of compressor stations and water treatment facilities. They have done this through increased scrutiny for site review and granting building permits, and through standalone noise ordinances. None have yet to locate within a residential area, so they have not applied these ordinances. County planners think that there will be more conflict as the rate of drilling increases. Most of the authority to regulate industrial facilities and infrastructure, such as pipelines, compressor stations, drilling wells, water withdrawal sites, and water treatment facilities, lies with the state. There's a lack of clarity of what local governments may and may not do under the Oil and Gas Act. There seems to be poor communication between the state and local actors. Most local governments do not have zoning, and this is mainly because historically they've favored individual property rights, and development has historically been low enough not to make zoning as urgent as it is now. Residents are slowly accepting the need for them because of rapid industrialization from drilling. However, county planners wonder if it's too late. And now I'll hand it back to Vera.
Thank you, Greg. As we said before, we would like to address land values as well as we did with rent change. Here we show you a model done by BBC consultants in 2006. They explored how land values behaved in Garfield County, Colorado. They modeled these land values for the first 36 months when a well is installed in a typical property with 40 acres and a small home in it. And you can see here, this red line is how the typical residential change value without a well in the property, and this is how it behaved according to BBC consultants with a well in it. So despite all these factors that they have here in the right corner in the legend, despite those factors, the prices still go up, considering the beginning point and the end point of this graph, only, and according to BBC consultants, because of the pressure that the new people coming in related to the gas industry make this pressure for prices to go up. We have been speaking about the boom phase in the boom bust cycle, and here we have three different indicators showing that in Wyoming and Colorado they are starting to see some bust in the boom bust cycle. Here you have some graphs about done by Headwaters Economics in a study released 1 month ago with recent data. Here you can see the vacancy rates that are going very quickly upwards in Glenwood Springs and Grand Junction compared to the state average. The same with housing price trends, where drilling counties, they go down faster than the state average. And the last one is building permits. Here you can see, of course, Sublette County in Wyoming, it's outstanding. And this has consideration in terms of how to manage this load of work in small counties, how planning departments deal with this amount of permitting when you need to issue building permits all at once, so to speak. And we would like to throw you again a question, a polling question. Does your community have up-to-date zoning to direct development? Thank you.
We're going to give you all a moment to think about that and bring in answers, and then afterwards we'll continue with our kind of final findings and recommendations. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and close it. It seems like most of you have come in. It seems a fairly even field between the two questions, but we think this is a really important question for you to consider at this time as drilling is nearing or already affecting your communities, because this is a regional issue, and even if you don't end up having drilling, it's something that the effects are going to touch a lot of southern New York State. So what have we found in our study? The first and most important thing is that Marcellus shale drilling is a regional issue, and that the county lines don't really matter in the analysis, even though for our data they seem kind of important. The reason it's a regional issue is because people are moving around the counties. People are commuting across county lines, and also the effects of drilling cross county lines. You have traffic, pipelines, moving water, large distances that are going to affect areas that may not have any drilling going on. We found a Goldilocks effect describing where we see the greatest effects when we look on average. And we see this in two ways. First, the counties that are most affected are counties that are not too big and not too small. And second, compared to where the center of drilling is, the counties that are most affected are not closest to the drilling, but also not the farthest away. It's another medium point, because people aren't going to drive too far, workers aren't going to drive too far away from the center point, but they're also not necessarily locating right where the drilling's happening. So that brings us to our next point, that the impacts of drilling, specifically on housing, are not spatially correlated with drilling. And this becomes an issue when we consider the funding that we're expecting to come from drilling. Taxes may occur in places that are seeing less of the actual negative impacts on housing if drilling's happening there and they aren't having a big housing problem, whereas other counties that have no drilling may incur kind of severe population changes, which they need the additional funding to cover. So this is a reason to think regionally and to work regionally in finding solutions. The final point is that our analysis looking at a county level actually hides another level of kind of change within the county. We expect to see the internals of counties being as diverse as the change among counties, and it's likely that there'll be differing effects between municipalities within a county. So we have several recommendations that we wanted to suggest before we move on to the next section. First, it's important to form regional partnerships, and we're seeing a lot of people doing that, and that's really heartening. There's a lot of state-level issues that need to be clarified, and we're suggesting that both through regional partnerships and within your county, you can press your county legislators and work with state departments to clear up the issues of what control, what jurisdiction you have, and to help guide the way the taxation works so that it can benefit a more regional perspective. We're also suggesting that it's a good time to start generating baseline data and also organizing groups to kind of develop this data and track it specifically with critical housing metrics. We think it's important to keep track of the availability of housing or the converse vacancy. Quality effects as particularly as new housing gets built. You want to make sure that the investments are quality investments that are going to be with your community for a long time. And also affordability. And affordability is probably the most important and the first thing that's going to change. You need to be able to monitor that and then link that with ways to affect change. And finally, this is a great time to review or institute zoning. In a community that is interested and concerned about changes that are coming, zoning is an opportunity for you to further your vision of what you want your community to be like. So we're going to take a few short minutes to answer a couple of questions, and after we get through a couple of questions, we're going to save the rest until the end.
Okay, so one of the first questions was, did you look at whether or not banks were willing to write mortgages near well pads?
Yeah, I think, Greg, do you want to answer that in particular?
Our quantitative data did not get to that question, yet county planners have addressed that this is a problem in that the banks will not grant mortgages to the lessees because they would not be the first lien holder of gas rights.
And I would add that it's important to say that we've heard that some banks were not giving mortgages, not that no banks would give a mortgage, and that there's likely to be kind of a spread of differences. We've heard both that there are banks that are actually devaluing mortgages because of their nearness to drilling, and particularly there's Fannie Mae requirements that address how close a house can be to a drilling site, both during the drilling and after the drilling. So the next question is, what was the average rent increase in non-drilling locations or the national average? Were the rent increases in drilling areas higher than the national average? I think it's hard to answer the question because the question is, what is the drilling area? And I'm thinking that you mean the composite of all the counties that we analyzed, and we actually haven't found the mean for all of the counties analyzed and then compared it to a larger area. But we are seeing, just kind of anecdotally quickly looking at the maps that we did, it does seem to be a particular increase that's correlated with drilling. Next question, and I'm sorry we can't give a better answer on that question, but that's the limitation of our research so far, and it'd be a great future research point. The next question, can the rent increases on the periphery in the Haynesville be attributed entirely to the gas play? It's halfway across Louisiana. Well, the shale play does span Texas and Louisiana, but in all of these cases, we don't know. We don't know if the rent is, causally affected by the drilling. We're just seeing this pattern, and we think it's cause for additional inquiry, and it matches what we've heard from people in localities. And if you want to add anything, and I think we'll do one more question, which is, does restricted zoning help or hinder regional potentials? Again, I'm going to say I'm not sure we can really give a fantastic answer to this. It'd be great to be able to compare counties that had differential drilling in different places. But that's actually a data point that we don't have. There's certainly reasons to think about doing it, but as far as comparing changes in rent or housing value versus whether or not there's zoning, we don't know. One thing we have heard is that there are developers, particularly mobile home developers, that are currently targeting up the southern tier of upstate New York, particularly targeting counties that don't have zoning for increased development because they see the demand and can push through development of this. So we'll save the rest of the questions until later, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom Knight.
Thank you, David. This is Tom Knipe, and I'm going to introduce the section on tourism and agriculture. Art, we will get to your question. That's a whole piece of the presentation. And before we go into the details of what we found related to tourism and agriculture, I want to sort of give a framework for what we're going to do here. Like the housing group, we did look across shale plays and at county groups based on the level of intensity of drilling. And, driving sort of our question about what's going on with agriculture and tourism was sort of a conceptual assumption around the promotion of economic diversity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And we looked at a number of studies and what they said about long-term economic development implications as well to kind of frame our understanding. And then we're going to go into the specific findings related to tourism and agriculture. So economic diversity is an important indicator of regional economic stability. Research has demonstrated that more economically diverse economies, those that are able to maintain a diverse array of local industries, are better able to withstand disruptions, such as those that might occur with horizontal hydrofracturing in the Marcellus Shale. One author, William Spellman, calls diversification consistently the best single predictor of avoidable risk. Maintaining vibrant agriculture and tourism economies may be a valuable means of promoting economic diversity in New York State. So the goal of our study here around agriculture and tourism is to identify alternative economic scenarios to guide policy decisions in order to enhance economic stability in the southern tier of New York. Several studies have shown that fossil fuel extraction is really not a good long-term economic development strategy. For example, a 2008 Headwaters economics study looking at energy-focused counties in the West compared to peer counties performed more poorly on a number of indicators, including having less economic diversity. Agriculture and tourism are both important to southern tier economies. In addition, there's some evidence that suggests that they may be particularly vulnerable to disruptions from gas drilling. And I'm going to talk very briefly about what some of those potential vulnerabilities might be around both tourism and agriculture. Let's start with tourism. There's the potential for a crowding out effect to take place. Austin's already spoken a little bit about that. For instance, more trucks on the road, you could have a literal crowding out where tourists are not able to get to the tourist destination. Around hotels, the price could increase, they could be occupied. This has happened in Pennsylvania, during the Little League World Series, for example, in 2010, a number of potential visitors to the Little League World Series were turned away because of the hotels being full of gas workers. There could be impacts on hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation, the disturbing of native habitats and animal populations, and fishing impacts due to pollution. Other potential vulnerabilities around degradation of landscape and the potential for brand erosion. Again, briefly, I want to mention some potential vulnerabilities of agriculture from natural gas drilling. Again, crowding out. We've already heard a lot today about increased wages for truckers, and the price of milk to co-ops has gone up, significantly because specifically that's a good example of the crowding out effect playing out in Pennsylvania right now around agriculture. Land leases, substituting drilling for ag activity on land. Vineyards, this is linked to the threat around tourism. And environmental quality issues, water quality standards on organic standards compliance, and dangers to livestock. That's a very brief summary, but we do think that there's at least a question around some of these vulnerabilities, and that kind of drives our research and look at the data. So I'm going to introduce Chris Smith, who is going to talk about our findings related to agriculture across shale plays. And then Chris?
Thanks, Tom. Hi, I'm Chris Smith. So as we begin our discussion of the links between drilling and agriculture, it is important to sort of reflect on what affects the agriculture industry. So we know that several factors affect agricultural industrial performance, including biological ingredients, environmental circumstances, global markets and economic conditions, and public policy and regulation. Human initiative is also in the mix. So agricultural outcomes are the result of more than just good natural elements and a green thumb. Agriculture is comprised of complex processes and subsystems. So when we turn to the question of whether gas drilling impacts agriculture, we have to keep that systemic complexity in mind. This leads us to be able to say, sure, it may have an effect, but there are other key questions that we have to investigate, such as in what ways, where are the impacts being felt, how much of an impact is there, and then how long is that impact going to be felt? Answering these questions requires modeling entire agricultural systems. This analysis I'm going to present to you doesn't model agricultural systems. However, what it does look for is patterns in how a series of economic performance indicators related to farming and agriculture changed as drilling has taken place. We're looking for these patterns across shale plays and within county types, the county types that have been presented to you before. These patterns can help inform policymakers to understand how economic actors in agriculture are responding to the drilling phenomenon. But before I continue, now we'll hear from Greg Waldman for some anecdotal reporting about what people actively looking at effects of drilling on agriculture in Pennsylvania's northern tier are encountering in terms of gas drilling's impact on agriculture.
Thanks, Chris, and I apologize for the scary picture. So after speaking with county and regional farm bureaus and county planners in Pennsylvania's northern tier, they have given us lots of qualitative information regarding the effects on agriculture. In 2005, leases were going for $20 to $30 per acre per year with 12% royalty. In 2009, and now leases are closer to $7,000 per year with a 21% royalty. These differential lease agreements and royalties causes resentment within the community from lessees who feel that they got gypped to lessees who made off pretty well. It has also generated distrust towards the gas companies. There are potential implications for agricultural tax exemption status. In Pennsylvania, Clean and Green is a program that exempts lots from some taxes that are 10 or more acres in size and are put to either agricultural use or enrolled in a soil conservation program. Through the Oil and Gas Act, Pennsylvania Clean and Green stipulates that farms that have drilling will not necessarily lose this exemption, but the land that is no longer put to a qualifying use is subtracted from the total acreage that is exempted. If the new acreage is less than 10, landowners will incur rollback taxes plus interest. Several lessees have negotiated agreements in their leases that the gas companies pay these tax increases. However, this is the responsibility of the landowner. Crowding out, which Tom has mentioned before, means that traffic makes moving dairy and other farm goods more difficult and slower. Or it also means that there are fewer trucks to move farm products because the truckers now took jobs with the gas companies rather than trucking dairy products. An article from the May 2nd edition of Tompkins Weekly, which is a county newsletter for Tompkins County, cites dairy farmers in Bradford County complaining that they must pay an additional 8 cents per hundredweight for hauling their milk to market. This article also points out that once a landowner leases his or her land, the gas company may place drilling facilities or infrastructure anywhere on their property, sometimes in places that interfere with operations of the farm. such as access points between the cows and water sources. There have also been reports that livestock have been drinking contaminated water, especially because they like the saltiness, and getting sick. In some cases, farmers use royalty payments to buy more cows, only for them to get sick. There have also been cases where people have been afraid of losing their organic certification status. So from these stories, we have gathered that there are two possibilities: either a reinvestment or a disinvestment. So money from land leases brings farmers to a crossroads where they may either decide to reinvest or disinvest in their farm. These decisions are likely to be based on the terms of their leases, the farm owner's situation before signing the lease, and other factors. In the reinvestment scenario, new money from drilling, either in the leases or royalty payments, means that they can buy new equipment and hire more farm hands to increase their operations. It also could mean that they're now able to pass their farm down to children or a trusted farmhand, whereas before they saw farming as a losing prospect, and that they would have to sell their farm and move away. Also, the secondary revenue could allow the farmer to keep on working. And in addition, the new population generates more business. In the disinvestment scenario, scaling back farming, farmers may scale back farming due to secondary income, or they may change from dairy to a less intensive production type, such as livestock or crop production. In some cases, farmhands go to work for cash companies, either full-time or part-time. And this may mean that there are fewer people working on the farm. And finally, this increased income allows the farmer to sell their lot and move away, maybe out of the county, out of the state, to Florida or something. And now I will hand it back to Chris Smith, who will describe how these scenarios played out in our data.
Thanks, Greg. So what we found in our trend analysis is a pattern of inconsistency. Within shale plays and across shale plays, even looking at rural versus urban dynamics, we found no consistent pattern for how the agriculture industry changed during the last decade of drilling. We thought it would be most useful for you if we presented this in terms of those two scenarios that Greg just mentioned, disinvestment versus reinvestment. Essentially, farm owners are responding to the proceeds from their drilling leases in one of two ways: by reinvesting or disinvesting in their farm operations, and by extension their local economies. The reinvestment scenario means that farm owners are putting their capital gains into expanding their farming operations. The disinvestment scenario reflects a decision to shrink or suspend farming operations. We see evidence that both scenarios are playing out simultaneously within individual counties, within shale plays, and across shale plays within the various county types that we've presented to you already. So what we did is, in conducting our analysis, is we gathered county-level statistical data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and from the Bureau of Economic Analysis for several economic variables, including farm acreage, farm employment, farm income, and farm expenditures. We gathered data for Colorado and Louisiana shale play counties, and we sought to identify patterns in how these variables changed during a 5-year span, 2002 to 2007, across shale plays and within the types of drilling counties. Patterns within county types that were consistent with expanding agricultural operations, we associated with a reinvestment scenario playing out. And patterns consistent with declining agricultural operations, we linked those with disinvestment. For the sake of time, I'm going to show you one simple pattern investigation that we did that we think illustrates this dual scenario phenomenon. In this instance, for each variable, we counted the number of counties within each drilling county type, and that showed evidence of either reinvestment or disinvestment. Again, counties showing positive change were associated with reinvestment, and those showing negative change were associated with disinvestment. what we see is evidence of roughly even dispersal between both the scenarios, between both scenarios and within the respective county drilling types. We think this suggests that, at least early on, farm owners are dividing evenly across these scenarios. And again, we see something similar for farm employment, a roughly even dispersal, and for farm income, and for farm expenditures. I'd like to point out that it may seem as though there is a trend of each indicator being more pronounced the farther away from the core you get. We would hesitate to draw that conclusion. The spike in the adjacent counties category really just reflects that there are more adjacent counties overall that we looked at. When we looked at composite figures for each category, we did not see evidence that effects were always more pronounced in adjacent counties versus, say, core counties. So as planners and people interested in economic development, we have a few goals in mind when developing policies and programs for agriculture as a local industry. One is keeping the land in production, maximizing productivity of the land and minimizing any productivity losses. Growing sales is another important goal, and retaining a diversity of farm ownership so that small farmers as well as larger farmers are able to have access to the market. So we came up with a list of recommendations. One, we think that jurisdictions should try to anticipate that farmers are going to respond in one of these two ways, either through reinvesting or disinvesting in their farms. We think that jurisdictions should try to provide farmers with business counseling and planning assistance. They should try to develop practical programs that can, and incentives for empowering farmers to implement their plans. This could consist of low-cost financing or various agriculture-specific tax incentives. We believe that jurisdictions should look at ways that they can support farming networks and exchanges that connect farm sellers with the buyers who would keep the land in production. They should think of maybe a variation on conducting a buy local marketing program that would allow local farms to generate new sales from transient workers and these communities that are popping up associated with those transient workers. And we also believe that jurisdictions should encourage groups of farm laborers to try to take ownership stakes in their farms. So now we'll hear from Tom Knipe again with some analysis of the effects on the tourism industry.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you everybody for your attention. I'm gonna give our findings related to tourism. Briefly, again, we did an original data analysis looking across 3 shale plays. We looked at the data in a couple different ways, by gas drilling intensity and by the 2003 USDA Rural Urban Continuum codes, which has to do with population density, et cetera, to try to see if we could observe trends on those 2 variables. Greg's also going to speak a little about the results of conversations with planners and tourism professionals in Pennsylvania before we present our summary findings. So what do we mean when we're talking about tourism? What you see here is a method for defining tourism in a local economy. So these several dozen 6-digit NAICS industrial codes are part of 4 main subclusters around accommodations, culture, recreation, amusements, food service, passenger transport. And then weights are assigned depending on the level of the amount of that industry was driven by tourism. And we collected this data for the 92 counties in Colorado, Louisiana, and Pennsylvania that were either core, adjacent, periphery, or extension. And we looked to see what changes we could observe on those 2 variables, or on jobs, tourism jobs, between 2004 and 2009, which again was a period of a lot of natural gas drilling in Louisiana and Colorado. Of course, Pennsylvania picked up in late 2008 and 2009. And it's important to note also that travel and tourism grew statewide, both in Colorado and Pennsylvania during this period. Louisiana, of course, experienced a dip in the industry in late 2005 and 2006 due to Hurricane Katrina, but it has since rebounded. So on this slide, we observed several possible trends when looking across different intensities of drilling. Here we see the central tendencies of change in total tourism jobs between 2004 and 2009. And in all three states, we see the periphery outperforming the core and extension counties in terms of increasing tourism-related jobs. Extension counties in all three states appear to be losing tourism jobs. In core counties, we would expect to see an increase in tourism-related jobs because of the increased use of hotels and retail services, et cetera. And we do see this in Colorado and Louisiana, although not to the extent that we might expect. In Pennsylvania, core counties lost 100 or more jobs. This may be due to several factors. For instance, we know that hunting and fishing as recreational activities have been in general decline as an industry, and these represent an important portion of the tourism economy in Pennsylvania. Given what we know about the spatial impacts of drilling, it seems plausible for Colorado and Louisiana that there is a sort of replacement effect taking place where some tourism activities are moving out of the core and extension counties where drilling is most intense to the nearby periphery and adjacent counties. Here we see median total employment change for the same county groups. What we're showing is that the overall economies tended to grow in extension counties even while tourism jobs were in decline. So this is the overall employment. I'll go back to the slide really briefly so you can see tourism jobs. I've broken this out for Pennsylvania here for the interest of time. I'm not going to speak about these, but we'd be happy to send the presentation to anyone. We want to make sure that we get to your questions. This is the same information county by county. What's really important to note, though, is that averages don't really capture all of the effects. They hide some differences between individual counties. And while we can indeed observe some broad trends in counties with different levels of drilling intensity, there are almost certainly unique factors at play as well. The next type of analysis that we did is we looked at these same counties and sorted them by their rural-urban continuum code. This is just a brief summary of the codes, with 1 being the most urban and 9 being the most rural. And what we really wanted to do is sort of find out what we could see from counties that looked a little bit like counties in the southern tier of New York State. We identified 11 counties based on 2 factors. They had 3 or more % of their economy in tourism in 2004. And second, that their rural-urban type ranged from 3 to 7. Not too urban, not too rural. And then we observed some changes, which are listed here. Real employment in tourism dropped on the median and the average. Percent change in tourism dropped as well. And the percent of the total economy of which tourism makes up also dropped. This shows you county by county what happened. We've just shown the median drop of 6% in tourism employment. As Austin said earlier in the presentation, the physical and spatial impacts of drilling will be different in core, extension, periphery, and adjacent counties, but the effects seem to be present in all of these related to tourism, as we can see here. This slide shows total employment change on the same scale in the same counties. And what's very clear is that changes in total employment do not appear to be correlated with changes in tourism. You might also note, this is maybe rather surprising, that there is not a good deal of overall job creation in these economies. Go back again to the tourism job for those counties that are much like upstate New York counties, and see how it doesn't really relate to changes in total employment. Very quickly, I'll show some slides. We also looked at what happened in very rural counties that had 3 or more % of their economy in tourism, and very urban counties. The median drop in tourism employment in very rural counties was a drop of 66%. And all of the counties in that group dropped. Now, this is the same type of slide on the same scale for total employment change in rural counties. Again, we don't see that they really correlate. There's something happening to tourism that may be unique to that industry. And for urban counties, we see that there's actually a trend pointing towards growth in tourism in urban areas, in very rural urban areas, with a code of 1 or 2. You'll note that 2 of the counties that dropped here are in the extension counties, are extension counties. And if you take those out, the trend definitely points towards growth in urban counties.
We have a point of clarity.
Yeah.
Just whether or not we.
What,
Repeat that.
thank you. The question is whether the recession effects of 2008 and 2009 were taken into effect. This is a comparison analysis between counties in the same state, in the same region. We did not look at national trends. We did look at statewide trends in tourism, and as I stated, during this period from 2004 to 2009, tourism industry did grow, although as we know, it experienced a slight dip in the first part of the recession. It's been on the rebound since. The jobs in the QECW are not sorted by full-time, part-time, etc. They are just jobs. So Greg's going to speak now a little about what we heard from folks in Pennsylvania related to tourism.
Thanks, Tom. We also spoke with several county planners and directors of visitors bureaus in core and extension counties in Pennsylvania. They've expressed that the effects of tourism associated with drilling have been both positive and negative. For the positive, hotels benefit from increased occupancy rates. Tourists tend to visit the region on weekends, leaving hotels largely vacant during the week. By accommodating drilling crews, hotels are now occupied throughout the week and year-round. As you can see, this is a Venn diagram, meaning that some of the benefits may have hidden costs associated with them. For instance, drillers also stay during the weekend and potentially crowding out tourists. Hotels try to reserve spaces for tourists, but often cannot accommodate all of them. Some bed and breakfasts are benefiting from this deflection. Increased occupancy rates may also drive up prices, and I will talk about this more in the negative aspect, the crowding out part. New hotels and additions to existing hotels are being constructed. This creates jobs in both the tourism and construction sectors. However, once most wells are finished being built and are in the production phase, these hotels will be less occupied and may experience financial hardship. Counties are seeing a huge increase in revenue coming from the hotel tax. This revenue is used to promote tourism in the county. However, there are instances where crews stay longer than the 30-day period when the tax may be collected. Literature that we have examined shows that revenue collected from this tax is less than what it would have been if the exemption were not in place. Counties are looking at ways to close this loophole, such as by having the state legislature change the wording of the exemption to only apply to persons and not corporations. Businesses are also benefiting from the increased sales in the new population. For the negative, I'll further explain this crowding out effect, which has been explained before. Tourists are being crowded out of hotel rooms due to lower occupancy rates and increased prices. They're also being crowded out on the road with increased truck traffic, road decay, and perpetual maintenance that causes detours. Visitors bureaus have been getting phone calls with people concerned about the destruction of the land. Along with county planners, they note that the industrial development associated with drilling, in addition to stories about water contamination and experiences with increased hotel room prices, make the area less attractive for visitors seeking to, quote-unquote, get away. There is mixed information relating to the effect on game lands and parks. As Tom mentioned before, hunting and fishing have been in general decline, and this has been particularly important in Pennsylvania. Visitors Bureau said there is no brand erosion, but they also say that they get calls from people concerned about environmental effects on drilling and the increased traffic. County planners say that tourism is also taking a hit. Now I'll hand it back to Tom.
I'm going to offer a summary of findings related to potential tourism impacts before we turn it over to Ethan to do our wrap up here. Our analysis of tourism does not lead us to offer a predictive model, but we did observe some trends worth noticing. Again, looking at tourism employment by drilling intensity, we found a general decline in extension counties, modest growth in core counties, and growth in periphery counties. When we looked at tourism employment by urban and rural type, we saw a general trend of decline in very rural counties, average decline in modestly rural to modestly urban counties, and average growth in urban counties. So there's a mix of effects, and impacts on tourism vary. The long-term impacts are uncertain, but our analysis shows that the tourism industry in some types of counties may be at greater risk of declining than in others. We have several tourism-related recommendations that we draw from looking at other studies and talking with experts. One would be to establish threshold measures of cumulative impacts and enforce moratoriums or other checks on the pace and scale of development linked to thresholds. If we want to protect the tourism industry, it'd be good to know what a level that would be a threat would look like. Another recommendation is to ensure that local and regional governments have access to energy revenue to support long-term economic diversification and development. Third, we need to look at the room tax policy. It's been mentioned in this presentation, but it's worth mentioning again that the long-term occupancy of gas workers, 30 days plus, triggers an exemption from the room tax and loss of revenue for counties and governments. Tourism tax for tourism promotion efforts. We should require mitigation of potential visual and noise impacts. Consider strategies to capture tourism revenue from gas workers and include tourism assets in road agreements. It's my pleasure to turn it over to Ethan Warsh, who's going to wrap it up.
Hi, my name's Ethan, and I just want to offer a few comments before we move to the general question and answer section of our presentation. Just to reiterate, our research presented here was concerned with the local economic effects of shale gas drilling, and we think that we uniquely contributed to this by looking across shale. Again, we took a regional perspective to understand the range of possible economic outcomes, and by that I mean we didn't look only at where exactly drilling was occurring, but also areas adjacent and around that. So we classified the counties as either core, extension, periphery, or adjacent, and we investigated economic indicators using various public databases that we found were relevant to New York State counties. While we understand that that there are a lot of micro and macro trends that are affecting the different indicators that we presented to you here, we do believe that the effects of drilling are nonetheless significant. One of our primary takeaways from our research was that averages don't tell the entire story, but rather that within those averages there are a number of discrepancies. That effects vary amongst communities and within communities. We also believe that effects are felt regionally, and communities with drilling and near drilling may experience changes. Certain effects that we presented to you today are more pronounced in different types of communities based. Specific findings, just to summarize the specific findings from each section, in terms of housing, the effects of drilling on rent and land value is regional and does not correlate with the intensity of drilling. Specific factors, especially with regard to town and city size, seem to be of particular importance. In terms of agriculture, different types of agricultural production seem to be more vulnerable than others. For instance, dairy may be more vulnerable than crop production. Farmers act in one of two ways of drilling activity: reinvestment or disinvestment. In terms of tourism, employment trends point to declines in extension counties, very rural counties, and moderately urban and rural counties, while growth is observed in core, periphery, and more urban counties. In addition to the information we provided here today, we believe there are a number of questions within the areas of housing, agriculture, and tourism that are worth pursuing. In in the future. Within tourism, within housing rather, we believe that we'd like to know if there have been successful government efforts to mitigate the effects of drilling and other extractive industries on rent and land values. Within agriculture, we'd like to know which types of agricultural production are more vulnerable to drilling and why is that? And also, is there a threshold amount of money that leads farmers to property? And in terms of tourism, we'd like to know how do the effects differ between different elements of the tourism economy? And also, have there been successful efforts to mitigate the effects of drilling on tourism? And lastly, we'd like to thank our clients, some of whom are in the room today. We'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time to tune in online and also those who will listen to this in the future. And we'd like to thank all of those whose work in this area we've
Okay, so we have a few questions that came in related to the tourism and the agriculture. So we'll take a couple of those questions and then we'll open the floor up into general questions. And I understand, are you guys and our speakers willing to take a couple minutes over if we have a couple? Can't go forever, but we will stay and take a couple extra questions as we go. So one of the first questions relating to ag that I think hasn't been answered yet is, did you find anything regarding consumer acceptance of farm produce from drilling areas and related to that an LR effect or organic certification issues?
We didn't specifically find anything in terms of consumer acceptance of agricultural products coming from drilling areas. I think we're still sort of early in the drilling process, and I think that there hasn't been, in terms of our search, we actually did do a pretty extensive look for survey data pertaining to agriculture and just how people were responding to agricultural products that are coming from those regions, and we haven't been able to find anything. I think that's going to be an area of investigation. In terms of organic certification, again, we didn't find anything there, but I think that's going to be an important area. Greg Waldman's going to comment on that point.
I would say that the areas where we did find the effects on organic certification have been mainly anecdotal. There's lots of reporting in township and county newspapers in the region and here. So although we did not find in our data, there are many stories around of either people losing their certification or people worried about their certification.
Second one was, have you done a control study of reinvestment, disinvestment in a region without natural gas drilling?
We haven't done that yet. I think that what we tried to do is, I guess, within the topology, the county topology that we have set up. I mean, I think that's an attempt to sort of account for some of the. It's an attempt to account for some of the effects that you might see outside of. I mean, I think that the adjacent counties serve as a proxy to some degree for those areas that might be outside of the drilling, immediate drilling, shale drilling area. But we haven't specifically looked at those areas that are completely outside of the main drilling areas, including the core extension periphery.
Tourism one, did you factor out the impact of industry segments which saw a drop during that same time frame, such as the ski industry declines?
I wish we'd had time to do that because that would be a good thing to look at. And I think, in the slides we indicated that that's a really important area for future research, is to actually look at the effects on specific types of tourism. And ski industry would be one. Agritourism, wineries are very important here in upstate New York, where we are at Cornell. So there's probably differential effects on those types of industries, but our semester-long research project didn't allow us to quite get to that. So all of you who are researchers out there, something to think about.
question, and we'll start moving back to some of the questions that we did not get to in the last question and answer period. Will the data behind the graphs be available? So we will be posting materials on the website. Is it possible for us to provide a bibliography? I'm getting nods of yes.
Yes.
So we will look into that, but chances are we can provide that. Okay, so this is back to one of the earlier questions that we asked about related to mortgages and banks. Have you looked at cases on banks that are not willing to issue mortgages without the gas leases being severed?
I'd say short answer, no. Basically, our analysis was at kind of a very high level of abstraction, looking at the county and almost at the state level, seeing the changes between counties. You know, it's a whole nother level of research to look at the kind of individual issues.
One that we had from the audience here locally, is there a conflict between reports that there are not new local jobs and workers coming without their families, and reports that rents and housing prices increase and there will be a need for school services? So these seem like contradictory points. Can anyone address that?
Actually, I'm going to add this to a question that I think we may come to next, which is about population change. And I think the question was, is the change long-term? It's difficult to say where people are coming from and why. We've looked at a lot of different data about it, and it's hard to tell how many workers are coming into an area because particularly drilling work it's a migratory job. You're only in one place for a short period of time. And actually, the drilling phase of shale extraction is a very short time. And so we expect people to move around a lot. In kind of the long-term effects, we've seen research on Western communities, interviews with workers, where a lot of people said that they were interested in staying in the area after drilling was over, that they had found something that they liked the area. So there was interest in that. You know, the question is, when the industry and the jobs move on, what will those people do? We've also seen in kind of longer-term analysis that extractive counties, or counties where extractive industries make up a large part of their economy, those counties are actually fairly likely to lose population in long term. And we think that kind of planning for shale drilling, which is ultimately, it's a up and down kind of industry. You get the gas out and then it's over. We expect to see an up and down kind of move in both housing, population, and a lot of indicators that will parallel the kind of the change in the industry.
Here's a general question. Do you have data on the type of pollution and disaster data mentioned? No. Okay, the answer to that was no. Let's see. Do you have examples of cities in the decline after the boom as it relates to housing? Sarah's coming up to answer that.
Thank you for that question. The Headwaters Economics report that was released 1 month ago, we can pass you the source for that. You will see several counties showing that in terms of vacancy rates, housing prices, and permitting, building permitting. So specifically, they are Grand Junction and Glenwood Springs. Thank you.
Do you have examples of recommended zoning changes to deal with gas drilling?
I would say that was not a part of the study that we did. There has been a recent report by other students in our department that I believe is available. Kind of deals more specifically with the design and hyperlocal issues of what can be done to control both actually the form that drilling development takes and I guess the scope and scale of it.
This is Heidi again. I have 335. We got in a couple of extra questions. I think there were some more questions, kind of comments towards the end, but I think what we'll do is close out at this point. If we didn't get some, we will make sure we send the chat transcript to the group and see if we can get those to you by email. We will be posting the recording up on the website, and we can post alongside that the bibliography, assuming we can pull that together, and also responses to the questions. So with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I also want to thank very much our student presenters. I think they did a fantastic job, did a nice job working through. We just had a total of 9 folks come up and move through that pretty quickly. So please join me in thanking them, and thanks again to everyone else. And with that, we will close the meeting.